Serious. Nurses and doctors have read it. What's your weirdest/scariest paranormal stories that took place during work? Part 2. Oh, I have so many, I don't know where to start. I worked in geriatrics, nursing homes, for years, so most of our patients died within a few years of being with us. Anyways, I had a new patient move into one of the rooms on my hall that my previous patient had just passed in. My new patient kept calling at night, saying that there was this woman who kept coming into her room and trying to talk to her. At first I just passed it off on her being in her 90s and struggling with dementia, so I assured her that I would lock her door at night to make sure no one would come in. After about a week of this continuing to happen, I sat down with her and was asking what this woman looked like, thinking she may just be hallucinating her daughter or sister or something. And she proceeded to tell me that this woman had a pink robe on with blue fuzzy slippers and her hair up in curlers, and the woman would come in and sit at the foot of her bed, pat the new patient's feet, and try to talk to her, but she couldn't understand what she was saying. I almost pissed myself. The patient that I had had in that room prior to my new one went to bed every night in her pink house robe, blue slippers, and her hair in curlers. It stopped after about 2 weeks. Growing up, my maternal grandmother and I were always pretty sensitive to paranormal stuff, but my mother was not. She thought her mom was a crock, and she was sure I was making stuff up, just as a preface. So while Mom was in nursing school, she worked as a home health aide. She got a pretty cushy gig working with this disabled woman named Mary. I was too young to know what was wrong with Mary, but looking back now, I would guess she was someone who was mentally 5, though she was in her 50s. Mary's parents had provided well for her, left her with her own giant, beautiful home, fully equipped for a handicapped person, enough money in a fund to finance care, etc. So Mom was one of only 4 staff to work with Mary, because she did not like new people, 2 midnighters and 2 day staff. She received around-the-clock care, but Mom was able to bring Mary home with her, so we spent a lot of time with Mary as a family. Mary was sweet and very kind. I actually have an old photo of me, her, and Mom when I was dressed for one of my dance parades. We all loved her to death. One morning, on a day my mom was off work but had school, she got up in a rush and ran downstairs. I thought she was late to school, so I went down with her to help her get what she needed to leave. But she was on the phone, dialing people who were not answering her. I will never, ever forget this. Mom was shaking and crying, blubbering to herself without making any real sense. She finally slammed the phone down on the side table and put her hands on her face, and I asked her what was wrong. She told me she had woke up to Mary at her bedside, patting her hand the way she did when she was very pleased with something Mom did. But when she sat up in bed, Mary was gone. The phone rang, and it was the nurse at the home. Mary had passed away the night before. She came to tell my mom goodbye. She still never believed in the paranormal, but she did quit nursing school and never worked in home health again. She never said, but I got the sense she couldn't handle another Mary happening to her again. My mom was pretty stoic, but that broke her. I am a psychiatrist, and during my training years, I worked for 6 months at a ward treating patients with depressive and anxiety disorders. It was an old building who had been housing psychiatric patients since the mid-1920s. On our floor, we had 13 beds and a nursing station, a living room, and a few conference rooms. One day, a few weeks in, I am interviewing a patient who, when asked about sleeping patterns, tells me she have heard a baby crying at night waking her up. There are no babies in that hospital as the place is situated far away from housing areas and there were restricted visiting hours. Afterwards, the nurse pulls me aside and tells me that the baby crying thing is not a psychotic symptom. She is very serious about this but won't elaborate. I kind of shrug it off, as either way, it does not change the diagnostic or treatment, and forget about the experience. Around 3 months in my stay, I sit in the nurse's station and 3 nurses behind me are talking. One of them says She's very active today." And the other says, "Really? Oh, hadn't noticed." I turn around and ask them who they are talking about. They look at each other, and then one of them hesitantly says, "Well, there is a baby here. She cries sometimes." I, of course, say no, but they just kind of shrug and smile. Not 30 seconds later, I hear it. It sounded far away, but not too far. A cry, clearly a baby's cry, sounding like it is separated from us by maybe 2 or 3 walls. I am perplexed and look at the nurses. They look at me like, "Told you so." I, of course, ask about this, but they can't say anything else but this faint baby cry is there and has been always. Since then, I heard it maybe 2 to 3 times a week. I told a new doctor about it who laughed. However, a few weeks in her stay, she came to me white as a sheet and told me she heard it in their coffee break. All the nurses just kind of knew about it. And being in psychiatry, hearing that kind of stuff is not really something you brag about. I was transferred and haven't heard it since. I think about it sometimes, but I don't really know what to make of it. Okay, so this wasn't when I was a nurse. I was working transport in the hospital, but I'm a nurse now, so I feel qualified to answer this. I got a call to take a patient to Sano. Keep in mind it's 2 a.m., and the patient I'm taking has dementia, pretty advanced, so I couldn't really make any conversation. Plus Sano is down this long hallway, away from the main part of the hospital. So while this patient is getting her ultrasound, it's just me, the patient, and the sonotech. So me and the sonotech are making conversation about how creepy hospitals are at night, and I'm telling her about weird noises I hear that I assume are just tube system. And I ask her about her end of the hospital since it's so secluded, and she says, "Yeah, sometimes people can hear a young girl laughing or a dog barking, but otherwise nothing major." So about 15 to 20 minutes go by with nothing. The patient is sleeping, and then I hear it. The dog barking. And I look at the sonotech and she hears it too. Then the patient's eyes shoot wide open and she starts to sit up and she goes, "You have to let her out." Keep in mind, this girl has not formed a coherent sentence since I've seen her. So of course, I did the obvious thing and said, "What?" And she goes, "That little girl in the corner, is that your daughter?" And then she starts mumbling and goes back to sleep. The sonotech cleaned up her stuff and noped the F out, as did I, and we never spoke of it again. Nothing else has happened since, but I still wonder about that patient and how she's doing these days. One time, I had a woman who had psychosis, related to her pregnancy, if I recall correctly, who had to be intubated and sedated in order to perform an emergency C-section. She remained intubated afterwards because she bled a lot and was on some medication to support her blood pressure, etc. She had to be heavily sedated because she was totally wild, and all the psych meds she was on made her somewhat tolerant to our sedatives. Well, the nurse who had her thought she was sedated enough and left the room. Within a few minutes, she got out of her restraints. We restrained almost all intubated patients, ripped out all her IVs, her central line, arterial line, urinary catheter, and ETT, breathing tube. She stripped out of her gown, somehow tore out some of her stitches, and then walked naked into the hallway with blood gushing down her abdomen and legs, all while screaming and running around. Security had to come and gently get her back into bed, where we gave her a little sedation and unfortunately had to restrain her again because she was going to harm herself. That was scary. Our patient's vent started alarming. We went in and there was a huge air leak in the vent system. We could not see anywhere with a leak, so we attempted to bag him, but it didn't work. You could literally hear the air leak from his ETT at that point. The man became very hypoxic and was already in terrible shape, so he started to code. While we were doing compressions, he was re-intubated. We discovered his ETT had been cut, very obviously. Unfortunately, the patient didn't survive the code. It was pretty clear that his family, who were the only people in the room with him, had cut his tube. Police, etc. were called. I don't know what ended up happening after that. Hi. This happened to me just when I started working as a therapist in a nursing home. I live in Argentina, and if you don't know, Argentina is a very religious country, Catholic/Christian for the most part. But I was raised in an Umbanda family. Umbanda is a pagan cult for some people. Anyway, the nursing home was an old house remodeled to be a good place for the elders that lived there, plus a building of 7 stories, known as the VIP, since the wealthiest elders went there. 7th floor is just deposit and offices. I heard from the nurses and security to never go alone to the office on the 7th floor of the VIP since it's haunted. Because of my beliefs, I do not believe in this kind of thing, so I tried to never go alone. But one day, I had to get some documents from that office and I needed them ASAP, so I went alone. I was in the elevator, and for some reason it was cold. At the moment it was summer, so we had 35 to 38 Celsius, but I ignored it. I make my way to the office, and when I'm there I hear a clear voice saying to me, "You belong in hell, you filthy sinner." It was the voice of an old man. I never told anyone about my beliefs since it's something wrong for almost everyone I know, so I have no idea how he knew about that. My aunt used to work as a labor and delivery nurse, and I remember her telling the story to my mom once. She was working a shift where the woman she was assisting in childbirth had lost her grandmother. They were not close and had never met, not long before her labor. In the middle of the frantic moaning and crying during delivery, the woman suddenly looked to a corner of the room, heaving and sweating. The only thing there was an empty chair. Nobody was there. She started talking to the corner, seeming to respond to questions and generally just having a full-blown conversation with what seemed like herself. My aunt and the other nurses thought she was just delirious and tried to just soothe her through and ignore her. The woman's husband and her mother would try and calm her down and say, "There's no one there," but she would continue talking to the corner. When she was out of labor and they gave her the baby to hold, her mother and boyfriend were there, and she turned to her mom and smiled and asked, "Did you hear her earlier? Is your new life everything you imagined it would be? An adventure?" The mother was shocked. Apparently the mother was an immigrant from China and left her parents behind for life in the US. The last words the grandmother had spoken to the mother directly was, "I hope your new life is everything you imagine it will be, an adventure." The grandmother died soon after. She had never met her granddaughter, and there's no way the woman would have known the words she said. Hospital doctor in Colorado. I have 3 stories. Working overnights and get a page that an old lady with dementia is flipping out. Says someone is in her room watching her around 2 a.m. Got this 3 or 4 times, and we decided to move her to a new room for other staffing issues. Move over an elderly man without cognitive impairment. 1 hour later, boom, same thing. Someone is in the room watching him, and the room is cold. I call bullshit and go check it out. Walk in, and the room is so goddamn cold I can see my breath. Have this eerie feeling something is watching me. Nope out. Move the patient to a new room, and leave the room empty all night. Side note, I ran 6 codes over 3 years in that room, and never got a single one back. Same hospital, has a big burn unit. People flown in from around 5 state radius. There was a Native American man that had a room for several months. Don't remember how he got burned, but was around 75% body surface area. Keep in mind every single day they are washing these burns out, going to surgery every few days to debride. It's horrible and not something I want to be a part of. Anyways, this guy eventually dies after months of this torture. Shortly after, weird electrical things in there, which I personally witnessed. Lights off/on, TV suddenly on at full volume and won't turn off, phone ringing and static on the other end. The RNs would literally walk in the room, say his name and cut it out, or stop, and I kid you not, whatever it was would stop. Every single patient in that room for months after talked about seeing a Native American man. It got so bad that the hospital administrators legit called in a Native American shaman from his tribe to cleanse the room, had a ceremony and everything. After that, it never happened again. This one creeps me out the most. Working in a different hospital, and the on-call room is an old, repurposed ICU room. Old hospital that expanded as they redid the old rooms. I'm in there asleep in the chair at 5 a.m. The nurses would sometimes pop their head in the room, so I blocked it with a trash can and Harrison's Principles of Internal Medicine textbooks, 5K pages. I'm drifting off to sleep when the door opens and someone walks in. Kinda looks like my partner that is supposed to be relieving me, but 2 hours early. Strong feeling it's a female for some reason. Anyway, it walks over to where I'm sleeping, leans over and hisses in my ear the worst goddamn sound I have ever heard. Sounds like an Aztec death whistle. Shit's creepy. Didn't know it at the time, but heard it later. I shake myself awake and am freaked out. Figure it's just a night terror, but realize the door is pushed all the way open and the books are holding it open. Never slept in there again. You may not believe me, but these things all happen to me. Hospitals are weird places. Almost everyone that works nights has a hospital ghost story, but they aren't likely to tell you because it makes them seem crazy. My auntie used to work as a nurse on a palliative care ward in a hospital. She always used to tell us this story about several strange things that used to happen when she worked night shifts. She worked the night shift with 2 other nurses on the left wing of the ward. The wing was made up of 2 sections with 8 beds in each. They had 8 patients in room 1 that evening. The nurses had looked after one particular gentleman for a while. He didn't often get many visitors, as his wife died years earlier and he'd lost touch with his daughter, so they quite often kept him company. He always used to ask the nurse to leave a light on by his bed so he could read if he couldn't get to sleep, or for the TV to be left on low. Apparently he liked the voices in the background, and it comforted him knowing someone was there. For these reasons, they moved him into the empty room 2 when they came into work around 9 p.m. so the noise/light wouldn't bother the other patients. This became a little routine when second room was empty. My auntie and the 2 nurses started their shift as usual one evening, and sadly discovered that the gentleman had passed away earlier that afternoon. Room 2 was now empty again, with the 7 other patients in room number 1. It was 11 p.m.-ish. All the patients were asleep, and the only lights on were those illuminating the office section where the nurses were sat, along with computer monitors and the ceiling lights at the end of the hallway leading to the next wing. They were taking their break, having a coffee and chatting, when one of them suddenly stopped talking and held her hand up. They listened and could hear someone talking nearby. At first they assumed it was someone from the next wing walking past, but the talking remained a few minutes later. My auntie looked around the corner to see if there was anyone there. No one. She turned back around to go towards the desk and saw a light shimmering in room 2. She called the other nurses and they went back into the room. The bedside light was on, and the TV was on in the bay where the gentleman used to sleep. Auntie said they got the shivers, but it made them feel slightly emotional. However, they switched off the light and TV and went back to the desk. This apparently happened on 7 other occasions over the following weeks, even when other nurses were working. Same light, same TV, always around 11 p.m. What my auntie said was so comforting, as she believed he enjoyed chatting with them and appreciated the extra effort they did to move him so he could watch the TV after hours. So he came back to see them again for their little ritual. The wards later filled up and room 2 was being used more and more, so was rarely left unoccupied. One patient mentioned a light turning on and waking him up around midnight once, but he couldn't recall which one as he went back to sleep. The legend lives on, and is explained to new staff who work there. Everyone on the ward to this day knows of the gentleman who likes to watch TV late at night, and they are told that if the room is empty, to make sure the volume isn't high and to let him watch like he used to.